Hello, listener. The fact you hear this means you're alive. If you're new here, consider subscribing and comment below where you're listening from. Let's begin the story. My name is Connor Hayes. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 12 years I've been a wilderness guide and survival instructor in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. I know how to build shelter in a blizzard, how to find water when there shouldn't be any, and how to read animal tracks 3 days old. None of that prepared me for what happened. The radio crackled at 6 a.m., and Dave Kowalski screamed my name 3 times before something tore his throat out. I'd been alone on the mountain for 5 days. Routine maintenance patrol, checking emergency supply caches, clearing trails, making sure the cabins were secure before the late winter storms hit. I was 80 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by snowmobile or a 2-day hike. The isolation was the whole point. After the divorce, I'd learned to prefer my own company. That morning started like the others. I woke before dawn in the small cabin I'd been using as a base. The temperature had dropped overnight, my breath fogged in the air despite the dying coals in the wood stove. I pulled on my layers methodically. Thermal base, fleece mid-layer, down vest, waterproof shell. Wool socks doubled up inside my boots. The routine was comforting. I stepped outside to check the traps. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, 3 inches of powder that muffled every sound. The sun hadn't crested the ridge yet. The world was gray and white and perfectly silent. 2 rabbits in the snares. I reset the traps and carried them back inside, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The radio sat on the small table next to my camp stove. I turned it on while I skinned the rabbits. Static hissed through the speaker. Then Dave's voice cut through. "Anyone copy? This is Kowalski at base station. If anyone's listening," his voice broke, not static. "Fear. They're in the building. Jesus Christ, they're everywhere. Connor, if you're out there, don't come down, don't." The screaming started. I grabbed the radio. Dave, what's happening?" His voice came back high and desperate. "Connor, Connor, Connor." 3 times, each one more frantic than the last. Then a wet tearing sound, gurgling, static. "Dave!" Nothing but white noise. I stood there holding the radio, rabbit blood on my hands, my heart hammering against my ribs. I cycled through the channels. Emergency band, ranger frequencies, the civilian channels we used for tourist communication, static on all of them. Then I caught a fragment. Martial law declared in Seattle. Avoid all contact. Not a drill, I repeat. The transmissions cut in and out, overlapping, impossible to piece together fully. But one phrase came through clearly, repeated on 3 different frequencies. Infected individuals extremely dangerous. Do not approach. I set the radio down carefully, walked to the window. The cabin sat on a high ridge with a clear view down into the valley, where the town of Cascade Falls spread out along the river. Even at 80 miles, on a clear day you could see it with binoculars. I picked up the binoculars from the shelf. Too much smoke. That was my first thought. Not campfire smoke or the thin gray wisps from chimneys, thick black columns, at least a dozen of them, rising from different parts of town. The kind of smoke you get from buildings burning. Structures that weren't meant to burn. I counted the columns. 14. 15. A 16th started as I watched, blooming up from the south side of town where the hospital was. My hands weren't shaking yet. That would come later. I lowered the binoculars and reached for my satellite phone. It took 3 tries to get a signal. The mountains played hell with reception, even on a good day. When it finally connected, I called Rachel. My ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in 4 months, not since she'd signed the papers and moved back to Seattle. The phone rang once, twice. On the 3rd ring, someone picked up. "Connor?" Her voice was breathless, terrified. "Rachel, what's—" Screaming in the background, breaking glass. Rachel's voice again, but not talking to me. "Get away from the door. Get away from—" The line went dead. I hit redial. Nothing. No signal. No connection. The phone's battery showed 10%. I turned it off to save what was left. The cabin suddenly felt very small. I grabbed my pack and started down the mountain within 15 minutes. The plan was simple: get to the trailhead where I'd parked my truck 5 days ago, drive down to Cascade Falls, find out what the hell was happening, maybe help Rachel if I could, maybe just get answers. The hike should have taken 6 hours. I made it in 4, moving fast on the packed trails, barely noticing the burn in my legs. My mind kept replaying those transmissions. Infected individuals. Extremely dangerous. What did that even mean? I reached the trailhead parking lot just before noon. My truck sat where I'd left it, covered in a thin layer of snow. But there was another vehicle there too, a silver Honda Accord with California plates. The driver's door was open. Fresh tracks in the snow led to the trail kiosk where I posted my backcountry itinerary. A kid stood there reading the posted notices, 17, maybe 18 years old, skinny, wearing designer jeans and a North Face jacket that had probably never seen actual wilderness before last night. He had a backpack at his feet and looked completely lost. "You Connor Hayes?" he asked when he saw me approaching. "Yeah, who are you?" "Ethan Parker. My mom dropped me off yesterday for the wilderness therapy thing." He pulled out his phone and held it up like evidence. "She paid for the whole week. You were supposed to meet me here this morning." Right, the booking I'd forgotten about in the last 5 days of solitude. Some divorced mom from California who wanted her son to experience nature and build character before college. I'd agreed to it because the money was good and it was just one kid, easy enough to babysit for a week. "Kid, we need to reschedule. Something's happened." "I know." He turned the phone around so I could see the screen. Text messages from a contact labeled Mom filled it. I read them in sequence. "Ethan, are you okay? Please tell me you're in the mountains. Don't come home. Do not come home. People are getting sick. They're attacking people. The news says stay inside, but people are breaking in. I love you so much. Stay in the mountains. Find Connor. He'll keep you safe. Stay there. Promise me you'll stay there." The timestamps showed the messages had come through between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. The last one had been sent at 5:47 a.m. Nothing after that. "I tried calling," Ethan said quietly. "Goes straight to voicemail. Dad's phone too, and my sister's." I looked at him more carefully. The jacket was good quality, but he was shivering. His hands shook as he held the phone. He'd probably been standing in this parking lot for 7 hours, watching his entire world collapse through text messages and trying to process that he might never see his family again. "Come on," I said. "We're going back to the cabin." "But..." "Look at your phone. Look at the service bars." He did, one bar flickering. As we watched, it dropped to no service. "Whatever's happening down there, we can't help with it right now," I said. "We need information first, and we need to stay somewhere safe while we figure this out." We started back up the trail. Ethan had to stop twice in the first hour, his breathing harsh and uneven. City kid, soft. I adjusted the pace, trying to find the balance between speed and mercy. "What do you think it is?" he asked during one of the breaks. "The texts mentioned people getting sick." "I don't know. But you heard something on the radio, right? That's why you came down." Smart kid, observant. "Yeah, not much. Just emergency broadcasts, mentions of infected individuals." "Like a disease?" "Maybe." We kept moving. The sun was starting its descent toward the ridge when we were about 2 miles from the cabin. The trail here ran along an open slope with scattered pines. Good visibility for 100 yards in every direction. That's how I saw the ranger. He came from the tree line on our left, stumbling through the snow in an awkward, shuffling gait. He wore the standard Park Service uniform tan shirt, green pants, boots. His ranger hat was gone. So was most of his throat. Blood covered his shirt, frozen in thick rivulets down his chest. His eyes were clouded over, milky white, instead of whatever color they'd been before. His mouth hung open, jaw working mechanically like he was trying to speak but couldn't remember how. He saw us. His head snapped around with a speed that didn't match his shambling walk. Then he started moving faster, directly toward us. "Connor?" Ethan's voice had gone high. I dropped my pack and pulled out the hatchet I kept strapped to the side. It wasn't much, 16-inch handle, 2-pound head, meant for splitting kindling, not combat. But it was all I had. I'd never carried a firearm on maintenance patrols. Too much weight, too much liability, never needed one. Mistake number 1. "Get behind me," I said. The ranger closed the distance, 30 yards, 20. His hands reached out toward us, fingers curled into claws. A sound came from his ruined throat, not words, not quite a moan, something in between, wet and hungry. 10 yards. I'd been in bar fights. I'd broken up conflicts between drunk tourists. I knew how to handle myself, but I'd never killed anyone, never come close. The ranger lunged. I sidestepped and swung the hatchet in the same motion, aiming for his head. The blade caught him above the left ear, bone cracked. He went down in the snow, twitching, that awful sound still bubbling from his throat. I hit him twice more before he stopped moving. My hands were shaking now. Blood steamed in the cold air, impossibly red against the white snow. Ethan was making a choked, gasping sound behind me. I thought he might throw up. "We need to move," I said. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "That was Mr. Patterson," Ethan whispered. "He checked my parking pass yesterday. He told me to have fun, to be safe." I pulled the hatchet free and wiped the blade in the snow. It took 3 tries because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. "He's not Mr. Patterson anymore." We reached the cabin 20 minutes later. I barricaded the door with the heavy wooden beam I'd installed for exactly that purpose, to keep bears out. Then I collapsed onto the cot, still holding the bloody hatchet. Ethan stood in the middle of the cabin, staring at nothing. "There's a sleeping bag in the corner," I said. "Get it. Sit down. We need to think." He didn't move. "My mom sent those texts 7 hours ago. What if she's—" "Don't." The word came out harder than I meant it to. "Don't do that. Not yet. We need to inventory what we have and figure out our options." "What options? We're trapped here. That thing that used to be a person." "Sit down." He sat. I took a breath and forced myself to think practically. We had a cabin. We had some supplies. We had time to plan. The question was, for how long? I pulled out my notebook and started making a list. Ethan watched in silence as I tallied everything we had access to in this cabin, and the 2 supply caches within reasonable distance. The math was brutal. 3 weeks of food for 2 people, maybe 4 if we rationed hard. Water from the stream 100 yards downhill, which meant we'd need to purify it. 1 satellite phone at 10% battery with no signal. A bow with 23 arrows, the hatchet, a hunting knife, no firearms, no way to call for help. And winter storms were supposed to hit in the next week, which would trap us here until the spring thaw. 6 to 8 weeks, minimum. "Can we survive that long?" Ethan asked. I looked at the numbers again, then at the door where I could still hear something scratching at the wood. Probably just the wind. Probably. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we're going to try." We didn't sleep that first night. Ethan kept the fire going while I maintained watch from the window, the bow across my lap. 3 times I saw movement in the tree line. Twice it was deer. The 3rd time I wasn't sure. By dawn, we'd worked out a basic survival plan. "First priority is information," I said, turning the crank on the emergency radio I'd retrieved from the supply cache. "We need to know what we're dealing with. Then we assess resources, establish a routine, and stay alive long enough to get out of here when the thaw comes." The radio crackled to life. I cycled through the frequencies slowly, methodically. Most were static. Some were recorded emergency broadcasts playing on loop. "This is the emergency broadcast system. Remain in your homes. Avoid contact with infected individuals. Transmission occurs through blood or saliva contact. Incubation period is 2 to 4 hours. Ethan's breath caught. 2 to 4 hours, that's it? I kept cycling, caught fragments of other broadcasts. Military evacuation of Seattle has failed. Infected individuals attracted to sound and movement. Shoot on sight if threatened. No confirmed safe zones remaining. The last clear transmission came from what sounded like a ham radio operator. Day 6 since outbreak started. If anyone's listening, the cities are gone. The infected can't run, but they don't stop. They don't sleep. They don't feel cold or pain. Headshots only. Don't let them bite you. Don't. Static consume the rest. I turned off the radio to save the batteries. 6 days, Ethan said. It's been going for 6 days and the cities are already gone? We don't know that's accurate. Could be one guy's perspective. Could be the truth. I couldn't argue with that. We spent the morning doing inventory properly. The cabin had 3 50-pound bags of rice, 2 20-pound bags of dried beans, canned goods, 20 cans vegetables, 12 cans soup, 8 cans tuna, dried fruit and jerky, maybe 4 pounds total, coffee, sugar, salt, basic seasonings, first aid kit with bandages, antiseptic, pain medication, antibiotics, 3 courses, 23 arrows for the compound bow, 50 feet of paracord, emergency blankets, sleeping bags, cold weather gear, water filtration tablets, matches, lighter, fire starting equipment, hand tools, axe, hatchet, knife, saw, maps of the region, emergency radio with crank charger. I did the math 3 times, same answer each time. If we're careful, we have 3 weeks of food, maybe 4. And then I hunt. The bow can take down deer if I'm close enough, rabbits, maybe an elk if we're lucky. What if you miss? Then we get hungry. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What about water? Streams 100 yards downhill. I can go at dawn and dusk when visibility's good. Fill all our containers. Boil everything. Should be fine. Should be. I looked at him directly. Nothing about this is certain, but we work with what we have. He nodded slowly. Okay, what do you need me to do? Learn fast. I spent the next 2 hours teaching him the basics. How to maintain the fire without wasting wood. How to purify water using the filtration tablets and boiling as backup. How to move quietly. How to recognize the signs of hypothermia and frostbite. How to use the bow if something happened to me. He was a quick study, I'd give him that. Focused, methodical. The fear was still there, I could see it in the way his hands shook when he thought I wasn't looking, but he was functioning. That was more than I'd expected from a California kid who'd never been camping before last night. As the sun started to set, we heard the first one approach. It came from the west, moving through the trees with that same shambling gait I'd seen on the Ranger. I watched through the window as it emerged into the clearing around the cabin. Female, maybe 40 years old, wearing a blood-soaked waitress uniform. Her eyes were clouded. Her jaw hung at an odd angle like it had been broken. She walked straight toward the cabin, hit the wall, kept walking, pressing against the logs, hands scrabbling at the wood. She didn't seem to understand that walls were solid. Just kept trying to move forward, driven by some basic instinct toward warmth or prey. "Does she see us?" Ethan whispered. "I don't think so. No lights on. We're staying quiet. She knows something's here, but not exactly where." We watched her for 20 minutes. She never stopped moving, never called out or made sounds except for a low gurgling in her throat. When she finally wandered off toward the tree line, she moved with the same relentless shuffle. "They don't get tired," Ethan said. "That radio operator was right. They don't stop." I nodded, made a note in my journal. Infected attracted to smoke from chimney, movement, heat signature, need to minimize signs of habitation. That night we kept the fire to minimal coals, ate cold rice and canned vegetables, sat in near darkness, watching the window for movement. Ethan fell asleep around midnight, curled up in his sleeping bag. I stayed awake, bow ready, counting the hours until dawn. At some point I realized I was crying, not sobbing, just tears running down my face while I stared at nothing. I wiped them away and kept watch. Rachel was probably dead. Dave was definitely dead. My old life guiding tourists, teaching survival skills, sitting in dive bars complaining about divorce lawyers, that was gone. This was what remained. A cabin, a kid I barely knew, and the long wait for spring. "We might not make it," I said quietly. Ethan didn't answer. Already asleep or pretending to be. Smart kid. I pulled my jacket tighter and watched the window. Sometime before dawn, I heard howling in the distance. Not wolves. Something that had been human once but wasn't anymore. The sound carried through the cold mountain air for a long time. We fell into a routine over the next week. Wake before dawn, check the traps, haul water from the stream in the gray morning light when visibility was good but the infected seemed less active. Ration the food carefully, 1 meal in the morning, 1 at dusk, nothing in between. Maintain the fire at minimum levels during the day. Let it die to coals at night. Stay quiet. Stay alert. Stay alive. Ethan adapted faster than I expected. By day 3, he could move through the snow without crunching. By day 5, he could identify infected by their movement pattern at 100 yards. The fear never left his eyes, but he learned to function through it. We observed the infected whenever we could, trying to understand the rules they followed. They moved slowly, shambling rather than running, but they never stopped. They were attracted to sound and movement. I tested it once by throwing a rock across the clearing and watching 3 of them converge on the impact point. They didn't seem bothered by the cold despite wearing inadequate clothing. One of them, a man in a t-shirt and shorts, wandered through our clearing during a snowstorm with no sign of hypothermia. "They're dead," Ethan said during one of our observations. "That's the only explanation. You can't survive in those temperatures without proper gear." "They're not dead. They're breathing. I can see the vapor from their mouths." "Then what are they?" "Infected, like the broadcast said." "With what?" I didn't have an answer. On day 7, we had our first real crisis. I'd successfully hunted a deer 3 days earlier using the bow 60-yard shot, clean kill, more luck than skill. We'd butchered it carefully, hung the meat in the cold shed attached to the cabin where the temperature stayed just above freezing. It was spoiling. Not all of it, but enough that I could smell the rot starting. Without electricity for refrigeration, and temperatures not quite cold enough for natural freezing, the meat was degrading faster than we could eat it. "We need to smoke it," I said. Ethan looked up from the jerky he was gnawing. "How?" "Build a smokehouse. Use green wood to create smoke without much flame. Low heat, lots of smoke, several days of processing. It'll preserve the meat for months." "Won't the smoke attract them?" "Yes." We stared at each other. The math was simple. Let the meat spoil and face starvation in a few weeks, or smoke it properly and risk drawing every infected thing within 5 miles. We do it at night, I decided, downwind from the cabin. One of us works the smokehouse while the other keeps watch. If too many of them show up, we abandon the project and run. It took us 6 hours to build the smokehouse, a rough teepee structure of green pine branches that would funnel smoke around the meat without catching fire. We started the process just after sunset, when the gray light made it possible to see but hard to be seen. The smoke began rising almost immediately. Thin wisps at first, then thicker columns that drifted east through the trees. We waited. The first infected arrived 20 minutes later. A man in hunter's camouflage, his rifle long gone, his chest torn open but still shuffling forward. He followed the smoke scent directly to our position. Ethan gripped the hatchet. "Connor, stay still. Let him pass if he doesn't see us." The infected walked within 10 feet of where we crouched behind a fallen log. His head swiveled back and forth, jaw working soundlessly. He could smell the meat, see the smoke. But without a clear target, he seemed confused about where to focus his attention. He wandered off toward the tree line. By midnight, 7 of them had passed through. None had gotten close enough to force a confrontation. The meat was smoking properly, the color changing from raw red to the darker tone of preservation. 4 more hours, I whispered. Then we move it to the cabin and let it finish curing there. 3 hours and 40 minutes later, the horde arrived. We saw them coming from the north, a ragged line of infected stumbling through the snow, drawn by the smoke or perhaps following each other in some mindless instinct for companionship. I counted heads. 6, 7, 11, 15. "We need to go," I said. "Now. Leave the meat." But now. We ran, grabbed what we could, the bow, the hatchet, my pack with the essential supplies, and sprinted toward the cabin. Behind us, I heard the infected reach the smokehouse. The sound of them investigating, knocking over the structure, finding the meat. We made it inside and barricaded the door, stood at the window watching the feeding frenzy. They tore at the smoked deer meat like animals, stuffing it into their mouths even though most of them had no way to properly swallow. The meat fell from their ruined throats and they just grabbed more, driven by hunger they couldn't satisfy. "Jesus," Ethan breathed. I was calculating resources. We'd lost 20 pounds of meat. That was a week's worth of food. Maybe 10 days if we stretched it. Our survival timeline had just gotten shorter. But we'd saved some of it. 3 large sections I'd been smoking in a separate area. They lay hidden under snow where I'd stashed them. Insurance against exactly this kind of disaster. The infected stayed in the area for another hour, searching for more food. When they finally shambled off in different directions, I marked their paths in my journal. North, northeast, east. They were spreading out but staying relatively close to the smoke source. "We can't do that again," Ethan said. "No, we can't." As dawn broke, I spotted new movement at the tree line. 2 figures watching the cabin, not infected. Their movements were too deliberate, too purposeful. They stood there for several minutes, studying our position. Then they melted back into the trees. I picked up the binoculars and scanned the forest, caught a glimpse of them moving between pines. 2 men, one carrying what looked like a rifle. Human survivors, maybe friendly, maybe not. I lowered the binoculars and checked my weapons. 23 arrows, 1 hatchet, 1 hunting knife. "We have a new problem," I told Ethan. They came at mid-morning, when the sun was high enough to eliminate most shadows. I saw them approaching from a quarter-mile out, 2 figures moving carefully through the snow. The one in front carried a hunting rifle. The one behind carried something wrapped in a blanket. I knocked an arrow and positioned myself at the window. "Ethan, get in the back corner. Don't move unless I tell you to." The figures stopped 50 yards from the cabin. The man with the rifle raised one hand, palm out. The universal gesture for peace. "Hello, the cabin." His voice carried clearly in the cold air, rough, exhausted. "My name's Trevor Milligan. I got a sick kid with me. Need help. Got ammunition to trade." I didn't answer, watched him through the window, looking for deception. He was maybe 40, wearing good winter gear the kind hunters used, not the cheap stuff tourists bought. The rifle was a Remington 700 bolt-action hunting rifle, 5-round internal magazine, 30-06 caliber most likely, powerful enough to punch through the cabin walls. "I know you're in there," Trevor called. "Saw your smoke yesterday. Saw you running from those things. I ain't here to cause trouble. Just need shelter for my little girl. She's sick bad." The bundle in the blanket moved, small, child-sized. "How sick?" I called back. "Got a fever, started this morning. She's hot to the touch, talking out of her head. I got medicine, but it ain't working." My hands tightened on the bow. Fever, talking out of her head. That's what the radio broadcasts had described. Early symptoms before the infection took full hold. "You need to move on," I said. "I can't help you." "The hell you can't. You got shelter, you got fire. My kid just needs somewhere warm to rest up." "If she's infected." "She ain't infected. She's just sick, regular sick, like kids get. Please." His voice cracked. "Please, man. She's 8 years old. I can't watch her die out here." I looked at the small figure in his arms. Couldn't see her face from this distance, just the pink of her jacket visible beneath the blanket. Ethan had moved up behind me. "Connor, if there's a chance." "There's no chance. If she's running a fever and delirious, she's in the early stages. 2 to 4 hours, remember? That's what the broadcast said." "But what if it's not? What if she's just sick?" I wanted to believe that. Wanted to think the world still had room for regular childhood illnesses, for fevers that broke with rest and medicine. But I'd seen the infected. I'd killed one. I knew what they became. "We can't risk it," I said quietly. Trevor must have read something in my silence because his voice changed. Got harder. "You got 10 seconds to open that door. Then I start putting rounds through it until you change your mind. You do that, you'll attract every infected thing within 2 miles. That gunfire will ring out like a dinner bell. Then we'll deal with them together. But I'm getting my daughter out of this cold. 10, 9, 8. I drew the bow and aimed at his center mass. "I will put an arrow through you before you get your rifle up. 7, 6. I'm sorry about your daughter, but if she's infected and I let you in, we all die. That's the math. 5, 4, 3. Ethan put his hand on my shoulder. "Connor, stay back." 2. Trevor raised the rifle. 1. I released the string. The arrow punched into the snow 3 feet in front of Trevor's boots. A warning shot, the only one I'd give him. He looked at the arrow, looked at me. I could see his face clearly now through the window, exhausted, desperate beyond reason. He'd made his choice. He was willing to die for his daughter. I understood that, maybe even respected it. But I wasn't dying for her. "You son of a bitch," Trevor said quietly. "You coward son of a bitch." He turned and walked back toward the tree line, carrying his daughter. I watched him until they disappeared into the pines. Ethan stood beside me, not saying anything. The silence in the cabin was absolute. "I need to check the perimeter," I said, grabbed my jacket and went outside before Ethan could respond. I walked the clearing twice, checking for tracks, for signs of other infected, for anything that would let me think about something other than Trevor's voice calling me a coward. Found nothing. Came back inside. Ethan was sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around his knees. "That little girl is going to die out there." "Yes. And we could have helped her." "No, we couldn't." "You don't know that for sure. She might have just been sick, regular sick." I sat down heavily on the cot. "What do you want me to say, Ethan? That I'm a good person? I'm not. I made a call. It might have been wrong, but it kept us alive. For how long? Until the next impossible choice?" I didn't have an answer for that. We spent the rest of the day in near silence. I maintained watch. Ethan pretended to read one of the survival manuals I kept on the shelf. Neither of us ate much. As evening approached, I spotted movement again at the tree line. Trevor, coming back, alone this time. He stopped at the same 50-yard line and called out, "She's turning. Fever spiked an hour ago. She bit me when I tried to give her water, drew blood." His voice was dead calm, empty of everything except statement of fact. "In about 2 hours, maybe 3, she's going to be one of them. And about 4 hours after that, so am I. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make camp right here where you can see me. When she turns, I'm going to do what needs doing. Then I'm going to sit here and wait my turn. And you're going to watch the whole thing through that window and know it's because of you." He sat down in the snow and started building a small fire. "Connor?" Ethan's voice was small. "What do we do?" I stared out the window at Trevor's back, at the small shape wrapped in blankets beside him, at the rifle lying across his lap. "Nothing," I said. "There's nothing we can do. Except watch, and wait, and live with it afterward." Trevor kept his promise. He sat by that fire through the night, feeding it with branches, keeping his daughter wrapped in the blanket beside him. We could see him clearly in the firelight. Every hour or so he'd check on her, place his hand against her forehead, speak to her in a voice too quiet to hear from the cabin. I didn't sleep, neither did Ethan. We took turns at the window, pretending we weren't watching, knowing we were both counting down the hours. The little girl Lisa, Trevor called her once when the wind carried his voice, started screaming around 4 a.m. Not words, just raw sound, pain and confusion, and something else. Something that wasn't quite human anymore. Trevor held her down, speaking to her urgently, trying to get her to recognize him. It didn't work. She went silent around 5 a.m. I saw Trevor sit very still, his shoulders shaking. Then he laid her down gently, picked up the rifle, and stood up. The gunshot split the mountain silence. Trevor knelt beside his daughter's body for a long time. When he finally stood up, he looked directly at the cabin. Even at 50 yards, I could see his face clearly in the gray dawn light. It was empty. Everything that had made him human had died with that gunshot. "I got 30 rounds for this rifle," he called out. And a pistol with 2 magazines, 15 rounds each. You got a wooden door and maybe arrows. I'm coming in. Today. This morning. I got nothing left to lose, and you got the only shelter within 10 miles. He started walking back toward the tree line. Not toward us, just away. He's going to do it, Ethan said. I know. What's the plan? I looked at our defenses. 1 door with a wooden bar, 4 windows with shutters. The walls were solid logs, but 30 caliber rifle rounds would punch through eventually. We had 23 arrows, 1 bow, hand weapons that were useless beyond arm's length. If he fires that rifle. The first shot came at dawn. I heard it crack through the trees, close enough that the sound made my ears ring. A warning shot. Then Trevor's voice. I'll be back in 1 hour. If that door isn't open, I'm putting rounds through the walls until you can't hide anywhere. He's serious, Ethan said. He'll actually do it. Grief makes people do insane things. What do we do? I checked the bow. 19 arrows now. I'd shot 4 at game over the past week. Fewer than I'd thought. The math was bad. If Trevor started shooting from 50 yards, I'd need a perfect shot to stop him. 1 arrow, 1 chance. Miss and he'd take cover, keep firing, eventually force us out or punch enough holes in the walls that we'd freeze to death. We wait, I said. See what he does. The hour passed slowly. I spent it checking and rechecking our defensive positions, looking for angles, thinking through scenarios. None of them ended well. Trevor appeared exactly 60 minutes later. He didn't speak, just raised the rifle and fired. The round punched through the door, wood exploding inward. Ethan hit the ground. I scrambled away from the window. Another shot. Another hole in the wall, this one closer to where I'd been standing. Last chance, Trevor yelled. Next shots won't be warnings. That's when we heard them coming. The gunshots had done exactly what I'd warned about. They rang out across the mountain like a dinner bell, and every infected thing within 2 miles heard it. They came from the north and the east, shambling out of the tree line in 1s and 2s and then larger groups. I saw them through the window, 15, 20, more appearing every second. Trevor saw them too. He spun, rifle up, backing toward the cabin. Let me in. Jesus Christ, let me in. The infected were moving faster now, drawn by the noise and movement. Their hands reached out toward Trevor, mouths working, that awful gurgling sound building into a collective moan. Connor! Ethan was at the door, reaching for the bar. We have to. Stop. I moved to block him. If we open that door while they're this close. An infected reached Trevor. He fired point blank into its head. It dropped. Another one grabbed his jacket from behind. He spun and fired again. The infected collapsed. But more were coming. So many more. Please, Trevor's voice had lost all its hardness. Just naked terror now. Please, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, just let me in. The infected swarmed him. 6, 7, 10 of them, hands grabbing, teeth snapping. Trevor fought with the rifle, using it like a club when he couldn't reload fast enough. His daughter, the thing that used to be his daughter, appeared in the mass of infected. Her small form pushed through the others, moving with that same relentless shuffle. She reached for her father. Trevor saw her, froze for just a second. It was enough. The infected pulled him down. I heard him screaming, heard the rifle fire 2 more times, wild shots into the air. Then just the wet sounds of feeding. We have to help him. Ethan was pulling at my arm. Connor. I watched Trevor die, watched him thrash and fight, and slowly stop moving. When it was over, the infected stayed in the area, milling around, searching for more prey. Some of them started toward the cabin. Get away from the door, I said. My voice sounded calm, detached, like I was giving instructions on how to build a fire. Ethan stood there shaking. You just let him die. He was already dead, you understand. The second he fired those shots, he was finished. Opening that door would have killed all of us. I could have saved him. I was right there. No, you couldn't have. The infected reached the cabin, started pressing against the walls, testing the shutters, scratching at the door. I heard the wood creak, counted heads through the window gaps. 23. Maybe 25. Too many to fight, too many to escape. Then I saw Trevor stand up. He shouldn't have been able to. They'd torn his throat open. I could see the wound from here, blood still pumping out. But he pushed himself to his feet anyway, turned toward the cabin, and started walking. Oh God, Ethan breathed. Trevor, the infected thing wearing Trevor's body, shambled toward us. His rifle lay forgotten in the snow. His hands reached out. His eyes had already gone milky. And he'd done exactly what he'd promised, brought death right to our door. How long do we have? Ethan asked. I looked at the barricaded door, at the shuttered windows, at the infected pressing against every surface, testing for weakness. "I don't know," I said, "but get every weapon we have ready. When they break through, we fight." The scratching on the door grew louder. They surrounded us for 36 hours. I'd read about sieges in history books, medieval castles surrounded by enemy armies, cut off from supplies, waiting for relief that never came. This was worse. At least those armies would eventually give up. The infected never did. They pressed against the walls constantly. Not organized, not tactical, just relentless pressure from all sides. I could hear them testing the logs, clawing at gaps between the boards, pushing against the shutters. The door held, but the bar creaked with every surge of bodies pressing from outside. We rationed our remaining food, 3 cans of soup, some jerky, water we'd stored before the siege began. No way to refill without going outside. The fire burned down to embers and we didn't rebuild it. Couldn't risk the smoke drawing more of them. Trevor was out there with them. I saw him through the gap in the shutters. He moved among the infected like he belonged with them, his torn throat still leaking blood that froze in black rivulets down his chest. Sometimes he'd stop and stare at the cabin for minutes at a time. Maybe some part of him remembered. Maybe not. Ethan had stopped talking around hour 12, just sat in the corner with the hatchet across his lap, staring at nothing. I recognized the look, shock settling in. The mind's way of protecting itself when reality became too much to process. By hour 24, I started making the hard calculations. The infected weren't leaving. They'd found prey, or at least the scent of prey, and they'd stay until they got it or forgot why they were here. We had maybe 2 days of water left. 3 days of minimal food. After that, we'd be too weak to fight even if we wanted to. The emergency supply cache was 2 miles uphill. Different location, better defensive position, more supplies. If we could reach it, we could start over. But getting there meant breaking through the infected surrounding the cabin. Impossible odds with 23 arrows and hand weapons, unless we created a distraction. "Ethan." My voice sounded strange after the long silence, hoarse. He looked up slowly. "I need you to listen carefully. We're going to leave." "How?" "We used Trevor's ammunition to create a noise distraction downhill. Draw them away from the cabin. When they investigate, we run uphill toward the supply cache, different direction. Should give us maybe a 30-second window." "Should. It's all we have." He was quiet for a moment. "What about Trevor?" "What about him?" "He's out there. He came here for help and He's dead, Ethan. That thing out there isn't Trevor anymore. It's not his daughter. They're gone. Then we killed them. By not helping." I wanted to argue, to explain that we'd made the only choice that gave us a chance of surviving. But I was too tired for philosophical debates about the trolley problem and survival ethics. "Get your gear together," I said. "We leave at dawn." The next hours were preparation. I loaded Trevor's pistol, a Glock 19, with 2 15-round magazines we'd recovered from near his body during a brief lull in the siege. 30 rounds total. I'd use them sparingly, mostly for the distraction, a few kept back for emergencies. I packed our remaining supplies, food, water, first aid kit, survival gear, stripped everything down to essentials. We'd be moving fast, possibly running, definitely fighting. Weight was the enemy now. Trevor's rifle was still out there in the snow, somewhere among the infected. Too risky to retrieve. I noted its position anyway. If we somehow survived the next few hours, I'd come back for it. "Here's how it works," I told Ethan. As the sky started to lighten, I opened the door and immediately fire 6 rounds downhill. Rapid fire, loud as possible. The infected will move toward the sound. We give them 10 seconds to commit. Then we run uphill. We do not stop. We do not look back. If one of them gets close, I'll deal with it. Your job is to keep running toward the cache, understand? What if they don't follow the sound? Then we're dead. But that's true whether we stay here or go. Comforting. Never promised comfort, just honest odds. Dawn came gray and cold. I positioned myself at the door, pistol ready. Ethan stood behind me, pack on his back, hatchet in his hand. His breathing was fast and shallow. Terror and adrenaline fighting for control. I pulled the bar free. On 3, 1, 2. I kicked the door open and fired. The muzzle flash lit up the pre-dawn darkness. Infected stumbled back from the sudden noise and light. I fired again, aiming down the slope, making as much noise as possible. 3, 4, 5. 6 shots. The infected turned toward the sound, started shambling downhill, following the echo, searching for the source. "Run!" We burst from the cabin. I saw infected to the left and right, but most of them were moving downhill now, drawn by the gunshots. We sprinted uphill through the snow, legs pumping, lungs burning in the cold air. An infected lunged from behind a tree. I fired without thinking. The round caught it in the chest. Didn't stop it. I fired again. Headshot. It dropped. Keep moving. More of them appeared. A small group that hadn't followed the sound, staying close to the cabin. 3 of them, maybe 4. They saw us and changed direction, shambling up the slope. I holstered the pistol and grabbed the bow. Knocked an arrow. Aimed. Released. The arrow took the lead infected in the eye. Perfect shot. It fell. Second arrow. Second, infected. Missed. The arrow flew past its head and buried itself in a tree trunk. Third arrow. Hit center mass. The infected stumbled but kept coming. Connor. Ethan's voice was high with panic. 2 infected between us and safety. I had 20 arrows left. Close range. I could make these shots. First arrow hit throat. The infected gurgled, but didn't stop. Second arrow hit skull. It dropped. Last infected 5 yards away. 3 yards. I drew the bow. Ethan appeared from my right and swung the hatchet in a wild arc. Caught the infected in the side of the head. The blade stuck. Ethan pulled, trying to free it. The infected grabbed his jacket. I dropped the bow and tackled them both. We hit the frozen ground hard. The infected's hands found my throat. Its face was inches from mine. Milky eyes, slack jaw, breath that smelled like rot and copper. Its fingers squeezed. I got my hand under its chin, pushed its head back, felt my windpipe collapse under the pressure, saw gray creeping into my vision. My other hand found a rock, smooth, heavy, size of a softball. I brought it down on the infected skull. Again. 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 The bone gave way. The fingers loosened. I kept hitting it anyway, long after it had stopped moving. Hit it until my shoulder screamed, until my hand was broken and bloody, until Ethan was pulling me away saying, "It's dead, Connor. It's dead. We need to go." I let him pull me to my feet, looked back at the cabin. The infected were returning from downhill, drawn by the noise of our fight. 20 of them. 30. Too many to count. "The cache," I gasped. "Go." We ran. My broken hand flopped uselessly at my side. Ethan supported my weight when I stumbled. Behind us I heard gunfire, 1 shot, 2 shots, 3, and realized I'd dropped the pistol back there somewhere. 4 rounds fired, 26 left in the magazines. Assuming I'd lost the gun. The supply cache appeared through the trees. Small equipment shed, reinforced door, emergency supplies inside. We reached it and Ethan fumbled with the combination lock. Got it open, pulled me inside. Slammed the door and threw the bolt. Silence. I sat against the wall, cradling my broken hand, watching my breath fog in the air. Heard my heartbeat slowly return to normal. Heard Ethan crying quietly in the corner. "We made it," he said. I looked at my hand. The bones had shifted under the skin in ways they weren't supposed to. Every heartbeat sent spikes of pain up my arm. "Yeah," I said. "We made it." Outside, in the distance, I heard a single gunshot. Then silence. Trevor's last stand, or someone else's, I'd never know. The mountains didn't care either way. 6 weeks later, the snow started to melt. Ethan and I had survived in the supply cache shed. Barely. The space was 8 feet by 10 feet, designed for emergency shelter, not long-term habitation. We'd made it work. Used my survival training, hunted with the few remaining arrows, melted snow for water, rationed the emergency supplies, waited for spring. My hand healed badly. The bones had set crooked, fingers bent at odd angles. I could still use it, but fine motor control was gone. No more bow work, no more precise knife work. Just grip strength and pain. Ethan had stopped talking around week 3. Not completely. Just down to essentials. Food's ready. Your watch. Heard something outside. The therapy kid from California was gone. What remained was something harder, colder. I understood. I'd seen my own face in the reflection from the small mirror in the supply kit. The man looking back wasn't the wilderness guide who'd taken that maintenance patrol 6 weeks ago. That version of me had died somewhere between watching Trevor's daughter turn and beating an infected to death with my bare hands. We'd returned to the cabin once, 3 weeks into our stay at the cache. The infected had dispersed. They'd eventually lost interest or followed some other instinct into the woods. The cabin was ransacked. Everything we'd left behind was gone. The door hung open. Blood stained the snow in dark patches. We found Trevor's body outside, partially eaten. He hadn't turned, the damage had been too severe. His rifle lay buried in the snow nearby. I took it. 12 rounds remaining in the box he'd carried. I buried what was left of Trevor and his daughter. Shallow graves in the frozen ground. No markers, no words. Just dirt and snow and the knowledge that they deserved better. "Did we do the right thing?" Ethan asked while I was covering the graves. "I don't know. He just wanted help. His daughter was dying. She was already gone when he came to us. We couldn't save her. But we could have tried. I looked at the graves, at my broken hand, at the cabin where we'd almost died. Maybe, I said, but then we'd be in the ground next to them. Now, 6 weeks later, we were preparing to leave. The snow had receded enough that the trails were passable. The temperature hovered above freezing during the day. Time to head down to the valley. Find other survivors, see what was left of the world. I packed carefully: the rifle, the pistol with its 26 remaining rounds, the bow and 14 arrows, food for a week, water purification tablets, first aid supplies. Everything I'd learned about survival in the last 12 years, condensed into one backpack. "What do you think we'll find down there?" Ethan asked. "I don't know, maybe nothing. Maybe some kind of settlement, maybe more infected. What do we do if there's nothing?" "Then we keep moving. Find somewhere safe. Start over." "Is that even possible, starting over?" I looked at him. 17 years old, and he'd aged a decade in 6 weeks. He'd seen his family die through text messages, watched a man kill his infected daughter, helped me beat someone to death with rocks, survived through isolation and hunger and constant fear. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but we're going to find out." We left the cache at dawn, took the trail downhill toward Cascade Falls, moved carefully, weapons ready, watching the tree line. We saw infected twice, once at a distance, once close enough that I put an arrow through its skull. Otherwise, the mountain was quiet, empty, like the world had ended while we'd been hiding in that shed. Maybe it had. 3 hours into the hike, we stopped at an overlook. You could see the valley from here, see what was left of Cascade Falls. Smoke still rose from a few buildings. Most of the structures looked intact but empty. No cars on the roads. No movement that I could see. "It's gone," Ethan said quietly. "The whole world?" "Not the whole world, just the parts we knew." "Is there a difference?" I thought about Rachel, about Dave Kowalski, about the weekend warriors who used to hire me for guided hikes, the tourists who thought survival meant Instagram-worthy campfire photos, about the version of myself who'd worried about divorce lawyers and mortgage payments. All gone, like they'd never existed. "Yeah," I said, "there's a difference." We kept moving downhill. My name is Connor Hayes. If you made it this far, thanks for listening to the story. I don't know what happened to the rest of the world. Don't know if there are safe zones or settlements or governments still functioning somewhere. Don't know if the infection burned itself out or if it's still spreading. All I know is what I saw in those 6 weeks on the mountain. I learned that survival isn't heroic. It's math and cold decisions and watching people die because helping them would kill you too. I learned that the person you were before doesn't matter. The world doesn't care about your skills or training or good intentions. It only cares if you're still breathing when the sun comes up. I learned that sometimes there are no right choices, just choices that keep you alive and choices that don't. Trevor Milligan didn't make it. Neither did his daughter. Neither did Dave Kowalski or Rachel or the ranger whose throat I cut or the infected I beat to death in the snow. I think about them sometimes. Wonder if I could have saved any of them. Wonder if trying would have made a difference. The answer is probably no, but I'll never know for sure. Ethan and I are still moving, still surviving. The mountains taught us how to be hard, how to make the calculations, how to live with the cost. If you're out there, if you survived like we did, remember this. The mountains don't care about your morals. They don't care if you made the right choice. They only care if you're still breathing when the sun comes up. Stay quiet, stay smart, stay alive. If you want more breakdowns like this, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment down below telling me where you're listening from. Leave a comment if you think we did the right thing. Or if you think we should have helped Trevor. There's no right answer. That's the point. Stay safe, stay ready, and I'll see you in the next one.